welcome to Dark Forces, the podcast that dares to explore humanity's most disturbing chapters. I'm your host, Nile Cross, and today we're diving deep into one of the most chilling aspects of ancient civilizations and occult practices: human sacrifice. From the blood-soaked temples of the Aztec Empire to the shadowy accusations of medieval demonology, we'll uncover the brutal truths behind ritualistic murder and explore why supposedly civilized societies turn to such horrific practices. This isn't just a tale of ancient barbarism. It's a complex story of religion, politics, power, and the human psyche. So settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about human nature and the price some were willing to pay for divine favor. Let me start with a question that might surprise you. What do the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac, Greek mythology, and Aztec temples all have in common? The answer is human sacrifice, one of humanity's darkest and most persistent practices. Human sacrifice represents the ultimate institutionalized violence, the torment and killing of innocent people to satisfy what believers considered a deity's bloodlust. But here's what's fascinating. This wasn't some fringe practice confined to a single culture. It was a global phenomenon that appeared across continents, across centuries, across completely unconnected civilizations. Take the biblical account of the binding of Isaac. This story from the first millennium BCE reveals that human sacrifice wasn't just conceivable. It was contextually relevant, enough to serve as a test of faith. The Israelites actually prided themselves on their God, Yahweh, being ethically superior, precisely because he required only animal sacrifices instead of human children. But here's the kicker: they had to keep legislating against it. Leviticus 18:21 explicitly prohibits offering children as burnt sacrifices to Moloch, and the very persistence of this prohibition tells us something chilling. People kept wanting to do it. King Josiah of Judah in the 7th century BCE had to physically desecrate sacrificial sites to prevent parents from offering their own sons and daughters. But it wasn't just the ancient Middle East. In Greek mythology, we have Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter Iphigenia for favorable winds. Roman history records 4 slaves being entombed alive to ward off Hannibal's advances. Welsh Druid legends speak of children sacrificed when building materials mysteriously vanished. From Kali in Hindu tradition to Quetzalcoatl in Aztec mythology, the theme is everywhere. And here's what makes this truly disturbing. These weren't just myths. Roman historian Tacitus documented human sacrifice among Germanic tribes. Plutarch wrote about it in Carthage, where archaeologists have actually found the remains of sacrificed children. The practice took root among Hawaiians, Incas, Scandinavians, and Celts. We have archaeological evidence like the famous Bogman discoveries. But perhaps most shocking of all, in some civilizations, it became a structured, industrial enterprise. The Aztec Empire, the Khons in Southeast India, and West African kingdoms like Benin, Dahomey, and Ashanti turned human sacrifice into a systematic practice on an almost unimaginable scale. Now, let's talk numbers that will make your blood run cold. Historian Matthew White estimates that the Aztecs sacrificed approximately 40 people every single day between 1440 and 1524 CE. 40 people every day for 84 years. That amounts to roughly 1.2 million human lives. But the Aztecs didn't just kill. They perfected the art of ritualistic torture. These weren't quick deaths. Victims were often thrown into fires, rescued before dying, and then had their still-beating hearts carved from their chests while they were alive. If this sounds like something from a horror movie, well, it actually inspired scenes in films like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The Aztec demand for sacrificial victims was so intense, it drove them into wars specifically designed to capture prisoners for ritual purposes. These weren't wars of conquest or resources. They were shopping trips for human offerings. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. The way these victims were treated before their deaths reveals a complex psychology that's both horrifying and fascinating. According to Spanish missionary Bernardino de Sahagún, who meticulously documented these practices in the 16th century, the sacrifices were elaborate ceremonies involving thousands of people. Picture this: a colossal idol representing a deity, lavishly adorned with gold, its hands outstretched over a furnace. Children chosen for sacrifice were paraded through crowds with great fanfare, decorated with feathers and flowers, treated almost like celebrities. They were then placed on the idol's outstretched hands and rolled into the flames below. The Aztecs believed that if the children cried abundantly during this procession, it would bring favorable rain. But perhaps the most chilling account involves the festival that coincided with what Christians celebrate as Easter. A young man would be selected to represent the god Tezcatlipoca and would be venerated for an entire year. Think about that. For 12 months, this person lived as a divine figure, with every desire fulfilled, including the company of courtesans. He was treated like a god. On the day of his sacrifice, he would ascend the temple steps, removing his decorative ornaments at each level, breaking his flutes and instruments as he climbed. Upon reaching the altar, priests would use obsidian knives to open his chest and extract his heart while it was still beating, presenting it to the sun. And here's the truly twisted part. This act simultaneously marked the selection of his successor for the following year. Some victims actually volunteered for this fate. Historian William H. Prescott noted that voluntary sacrifice was considered a noble death that guaranteed entry into paradise. Imagine a society where people competed for the privilege of being ritually murdered. Now, let's shift gears dramatically and talk about how accusations of human sacrifice became weapons of political warfare. The very people who would later become history's most prolific accusers, Christians, were once themselves the accused. In the early days of Christianity, pagan Romans viewed these new religious communities as dangerous minorities threatening the empire's social fabric. Roman authorities alleged that Christians engaged in horrific rituals during secret gatherings, the ritualistic slaughter of infants, drinking their blood, cannibalistic consumption of flesh, sexual orgies, and incest. These charges were, of course, severe misrepresentations of actual Christian rituals, like the Eucharist and the Agape feast. But here's what's crucial to understand. These accusations were more political than religious. They reflected fears that Christians were undermining Roman unity and law. Fast forward to 1022 in Orleans, France, and we see how this playbook got flipped. Approximately 14 people were burned alive as heretics, marking the beginning of centuries of persecution targeting so-called witches, heretics, and Jews. But here's the pattern. Those executed were essentially pawns in power struggles between kings and local nobility. The Orleans event created what we might call the satanic cult legend, a story completely devoid of truth, but incredibly potent as a political weapon. As European societies faced growing instability and peasant revolts, accusations of devil worship became convenient tools for quelling dissent and maintaining medieval hierarchies. The accused heretics were said to conduct secret rituals, venerating the devil, participate in lascivious gatherings, and sacrifice infants whose ashes were supposedly used to create magical ointments. Sound familiar? It's almost identical to what Romans had accused early Christians of doing, centuries earlier. This pattern reveals something profound about human nature. When societies face instability, they often create scapegoats and attribute to them the very behaviors they fear most. The accusation of child sacrifice becomes the ultimate weapon because it combines our deepest taboos, harming children, with our greatest fears about hidden enemies within our midst. This brings us to a disturbing question. Why do some people actually engage in ritualistic murder in the name of Satan or dark forces? While documented cases are rare, they do exist, and understanding the psychology behind them reveals something chilling about human nature. First, there's the concept of religious inversion. For individuals attracted to anti-religious paths, human sacrifice represents the ultimate rejection of mainstream moral values. While traditional religions emphasize compassion and the sanctity of life, offering a human victim deliberately desecrates these principles. To those who believe they're serving Satan, this demonstrates loyalty by embracing destruction over creation. Then there's the belief in power exchange. Many occult practices operate on transactional principles. The life force of a human being is considered the most powerful offering possible. Practitioners imagine they're feeding demonic entities to secure protection, wealth, or supernatural powers. It's horrifying, but to them, it's a business transaction with supernatural forces. From a psychological standpoint, human sacrifice often functions as externalization of inner conflict. Individuals under extreme stress project their fears and failures onto chosen victims, treating their deaths as forms of absolution. In cult dynamics, shared rituals of violence bind members together through secrecy and collective guilt. But there's also something even more basic at work: the thrill of ultimate transgression. Human sacrifice breaks the strongest taboo, providing a sense of absolute control for those seeking dominance through fear. Within criminal cults, such rituals intimidate followers and ensure obedience by implicating them in blood crimes. However, we must acknowledge that many modern claims of satanic human sacrifice arise not from verified events, but from cultural fear, particularly during the satanic panic of the 1980s and 1990s. While documented cases of cult-related killings exist, they're extremely rare and often tied more to psychological instability than organized religious practice. The intersection of blood and sexuality has been central to dark ritualistic practices throughout history. In black magic ceremonies, both animal and allegedly human blood offerings are viewed as ways to honor dark masters, with the drinking of blood holding significant ritual importance. What's particularly disturbing is how these themes influence serial killers and violent criminals who may not even be practicing Satanists. The connection between blood and sexual violence reveals unconscious psychological roots that drive such perversions. During the medieval period, when understanding of human psychology was limited, the devil was routinely blamed for atrocious acts that exceeded human comprehension. This contributed to widespread panic and persecution, most notably during the infamous witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries. These witch hunts revealed a grim reality where innocent people, predominantly elderly women, were accused, tortured, and executed under false pretenses. The actual guilt among the accused was minimal, yet hysteria led to mass persecution. In Germany alone, an estimated 100,000 people were killed as witches, often after confessions extracted under extreme torture. The methods were beyond brutal. Many victims were burned alive, and in Nice, Silesia, authorities constructed a special oven where over 1,000 people, some as young as 2 years old, were executed over 9 years. Consider the case of Gilles Garnier, in 1573 at Dole, France. This solitary individual confessed to multiple child murders, characterized by mutilation and partial consumption of bodies. Due to limited understanding of psychology, Garnier's actions were attributed to supernatural influences. He was declared a loup-garou, or werewolf. Garnier claimed he'd gained this ability through witchcraft, having met a ghostly figure who taught him to transform using special ointment. His confession described tearing a 12-year-old child apart and consuming her remains. Whether in human or supposed wolf form, he admitted to acts of murder and cannibalism that illustrated the complex interplay of myth, fear, and genuine criminal deviance. Now let's address a fundamental question. Why did intelligent civilizations engage in such seemingly wasteful practices? While political violence serves obvious purposes, eliminating enemies, discouraging rebellion, showcasing power, sacrificing innocents appears economically and socially counterproductive. Political scientist James Paine offers a compelling theory. Ancient civilizations valued human life less due to their familiarity with pain and mortality. Frequent exposure to uncontrollable catastrophes, epidemics, famines, conflicts, conditioned societies to accept high human costs, if they offered perceived advantages or divine favor. Given the omnipresence of religious belief in ancient times, human sacrifices might have seemed like logical exchanges for divine protection. The notion of proactive appeasement, preventing potential damage by satisfying hypothetical deities with supposed preferences for human suffering, emerged from this grim, pragmatic mindset. Consider the various forms this took. Construction sacrifices involved burying living beings beneath foundations of significant structures to honor gods, practiced from Wales to Germany, India, Japan, and China. Burial sacrifice saw deceased kings accompanied by living entourages, or harems in Sumeria, Egypt, China, and Japan. The practice of sati in India, where widows self-immolated on their husbands' funeral pyres, accounted for 200,000 lives before prohibition in 1829. These weren't random acts of violence, but systematic practices embedded in social and religious structures. The economic logic becomes clearer when we consider that these practices often redistributed wealth and maintained social hierarchies. Sacrificial ceremonies frequently involved massive feasts and redistribution of goods, while simultaneously eliminating potential challengers to existing power structures. So how did humanity eventually move beyond these barbaric practices? The transformation wasn't uniform or simultaneous, but several factors contributed to this moral evolution. External influences played a significant role. Christian missionaries like St. Patrick in Ireland and colonial interventions by European powers helped suppress local sacrificial practices. British General Charles Napier's response to objections about outlawing sati in India became legendary. "You say it is your custom to burn widows. Very well, we also have a custom. When men burn a woman alive, we tie a rope around their necks and we hang them. Build your funeral pyre. Beside it, my carpenters will build a gallows." But the practice also faded independently over time in stable, literate societies. Literacy provided exposure to alternative explanations for cosmic and terrestrial phenomena, undermining notions that appeasing bloodthirsty gods solved worldly problems. Education and increased interaction with external societies gradually eroded the mythological foundations supporting human sacrifice. As societies achieved greater stability and affluence, their appreciation for human life increased. The economic waste of destroying productive community members became more apparent, while alternative methods of maintaining social cohesion and religious devotion developed. An illustrative case from Japan exemplifies this evolution. In 2 BCE, when the emperor's brother died, attendants were buried alive beside him in traditional fashion. However, the prolonged suffering and cries of the dying disturbed the emperor so profoundly that when his wife later died, clay models replaced living humans in her funeral procession. This decision suggests an increasingly sophisticated moral compass that valued human life over ritual tradition. The emperor apparently decided that potential divine displeasure was manageable compared to the human cost of sustaining such practices. As we near the end of our journey through humanity's darkest ritualistic practices, it's crucial to distinguish between historical reality and modern mythology. While ancient human sacrifice was undeniably real and widespread, contemporary claims often reflect cultural anxieties more than actual practices. The satanic panic of the late 20th century demonstrated how quickly societies can create and spread unfounded fears about ritualistic violence. Urban legends exaggerated the prevalence of modern ritual murders, often with little factual basis. While documented cases of cult-related killings exist, they remain extremely rare and are typically connected to psychological instability rather than organized religious movements. This tendency to attribute incomprehensible violence to supernatural forces persists today. Just as medieval societies blamed werewolves and devils for serial killings, modern cultures sometimes invoke satanic ritual abuse to explain behaviors that challenge our understanding of human psychology. The reality is that the intersection of blood rituals and sexual violence continues to influence certain criminal behaviors, but these stem from complex psychological and social factors rather than genuine religious practices. Many violent offenders who incorporate ritualistic elements into their crimes are driven by power fantasies and psychological disturbances rather than coherent belief systems. What remains consistent across centuries is humanity's tendency to project our deepest fears onto marginalized groups, creating scapegoats for social anxieties and unexplained violence. The accusations of child sacrifice that moved from early Christians to medieval heretics to modern cult panics follow remarkably similar patterns, suggesting these claims serve political and psychological functions regardless of their factual accuracy. Understanding this history doesn't diminish the reality of past atrocities or the genuine suffering they caused. Instead, it helps us recognize how societies construct and deploy narratives of ritualistic violence, often revealing more about the accusers than the accused. The transformation from sacrifice-practicing civilizations to modern societies that largely reject such practices represents genuine moral progress. However, the psychological and social factors that once drove these behaviors, fear of the unknown, desire for control, need for social cohesion, and belief in supernatural intervention, remain part of human nature. By studying these dark chapters of human history, we gain insight not only into past atrocities, but into the ongoing challenges of building societies that value human dignity and resist the temptation to scapegoat vulnerable populations. The blood-soaked altars of the past serve as reminders of how far we've come, and warnings about how far we could fall if we forget these lessons. That wraps up our look into human sacrifice, an ancient practice revealing much about human cruelty and transformation. From Aztec rituals to medieval witch hunts, these stories expose how societies grapple with fear and power. But what if the darkest tales from the past still echo in today's world? The full story uncovers chilling connections you won't want to miss. Download the Skoob app now to get exclusive access to the complete episode and dive deeper into these haunting truths. Stay curious and I'll see you next time.